A ceiling of dust falls like flour in the general staff bunker, as generators roar to life, pinning maps with candle wax, while portraits of Saddam Hussein stare down beside operational grids that will soon be rendered obsolete by severed telephone lines. This is the story of how Saddam Hussein's war machine, once feared as the fourth largest army on Earth, was systematically dismantled in 100 hours, told through the eyes of those who gave the orders, manned the trenches, and watched their world collapse under a sky turned perpetually orange from burning oil. It's a tale of delusion meeting reality, where loyalty oaths couldn't stop laser-guided bombs, and where the same generals who invaded Kuwait would soon be burning their codebooks in 200-litre drums. August 2nd, 1990. Dawn breaks over Kuwait as approximately 100,000 Iraqi troops and 700 tanks thunder across the border in two armoured spearheads. The invasion is swift, brutal, clinical. Saddam Hussein's gamble that the world will accept this annexation as fait accompli begins with the methodical efficiency of a regime that has spent 8 years at war with Iran. Within 72 hours, Baghdad forms the Kuwait Theatre of Operations, the KTO, layering regular army divisions in Kuwait itself, while keeping the Republican Guard, the Medina, Tawakkalna, Hammurabi, Nebuchadnezzar divisions deeper inside Iraq as a fire brigade to protect the regime. But protecting the regime is always Saddam's priority, not Kuwait. By January 1991, Iraq fields approximately 43 divisions in the south. On paper, that's 545,000 personnel, but assessments suggest only 60 to 70% are combat ready. The rest? Conscripts whose boots are already falling apart, whose fuel drums have been diluted with water, whose rations have degraded to flat cubes bread, tins of sardines, and weak tea that tastes of diesel. Inside command posts throughout the KTO, portraits of Saddam hang beside operational maps. Officers must sign loyalty pledges before receiving written orders, a bureaucratic ritual that will prove catastrophic when minutes matter, and approvals take 8 to 12 hours by courier. The communication infrastructure, this elaborate web of landlines strung along highways with backup HF radios rationed to corps headquarters, will be the first casualty when the storm begins. The defensive line stretches approximately 300 kilometers. Sand berms, trench networks, forward bunkers constructed from plywood, sandbags, and scavenged doors for overhead cover. Engineers work day and night, but they're building theatre props for a production that will be cancelled. Officers report the same litany of problems. Fuel drums diluted with water to stretch stocks, clogged T-55 fuel filters becoming a daily maintenance ritual, ammunition stocks that look impressive until you realize half the artillery shells are from the 1950s. In Kuwait City, Bath officials requisition apartments for billets. Officers sleep on velvet sofas under garish chandeliers, blackout curtains pinned with bayonets. It's an occupier's luxury that won't last. They've turned the emirate into a massive staging ground, but comfort breeds complacency. The soldiers stationed here have no idea they're living in what will become a killing field. Saddam expects the coalition if it comes to push straight up Wadi al-Batin. He concentrates 5 to 6 divisions east of Kuwait. The Western Desert, that vast expanse of nothing where history will actually be made, is left to thin screening elements. It's the same strategic blindness that cost him in the Iran-Iraq War, the same refusal to believe that modern armies can maneuver through impassable terrain. The KTO's artillery fires 4,000 to 6,000 rounds per day in early January, mainly harassment fire. It sounds impressive until you realize shell stocks are dwindling, tubes are overheating, muzzles splitting from the sustained tempo. Survivors will later recall how the night sky strobed white-blue as cluster bomblets popped for minutes, how mangled telephone poles hummed like tuning forks, how the desert smelled of kerosene and damp canvas and cordite after each raid. Republican Guard ammunition columns move at night with headlights off. Drivers tape phosphor sticks to bumpers to keep approximately 15 meters of spacing, a pathetic defense against satellites that can read license plates from orbit. Brigade tactical operations centers keep 2 clocks, Baghdad time and Zulu -3 for intercepted coalition radio timing. Scribes track strike cycles, trying to guess lulls when supplies can move without being turned into scrap metal. January temperatures, near 6 to 10 degrees Celsius, soak soldiers in icy drizzle. Trench floors transform into a paste of diesel-soaked mud and crushed gypsum. Men huddle for warmth, brewing weak tea in ammunition cans, trying to keep their weapons clean in conditions that make everything filthy. The cold is worse than the heat they trained for. worse than the expectations of desert warfare. Coalition leaflet drops exceed 29 million pieces. An Iraqi colonel orders soldiers to collect 500 per platoon for incineration to avoid poisonous lies. But soldiers pocket them anyway, reading promises of bread, water, medical care if they surrender within 24 hours. One Brigade S2 intelligence officer scrawls in the margin, "Is this a trick?" Try to imagine yourself in that bunker, orders in hand requiring Saddam's personal approval, watching your radio batteries die after 10 minutes of use, knowing that somewhere in the darkness above, satellites are photographing your exact position while you can't even call battalion headquarters. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, hit that subscribe button because this story only gets more catastrophic from here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and whether you think Saddam ever understood what was about to hit him. The clock ticks toward January 17th. In Baghdad, Saddam convenes his generals and security chiefs. The ratio around the table, 2-1 in favor of half-brothers and security apparatus over line officers. They're preparing for a war where loyalty matters more than competence, where survival means pleasing the palace, where the truth is whatever Saddam decides it to be. The KTO waits, dug into sand and delusion, while in the darkness above, coalition aircraft begin their final checks, ordnance loaded, coordinates locked, waiting for the word to unleash a storm that will make Kuwait's August invasion look like a parade ground exercise. The General Staff bunker vibrates at precisely 2:38 a.m. Baghdad time on January 17th as anti-radiation missiles shutter air defense radars across Iraq, transforming one of the world's densest integrated air defense systems into a collection of blind, deaf sentinels firing at ghosts. What follows isn't just an air campaign, it's the systematic deconstruction of an army's nervous system, leaving 500,000 men scattered across Kuwait and southern Iraq unable to communicate, coordinate, or even understand what's happening beyond their immediate foxhole. This is the story of how air supremacy doesn't just destroy equipment, it atomizes command, shatters morale, and turns proud divisions into isolated clusters of frightened men waiting for orders that will never arrive. Within 12 hours of the first strike, over 1,000 coalition sorties sever telephone trunks to the KTO. The elaborate landline network that Saddam's planners spent months installing, strung along highways, buried in trenches, connected to every command post, becomes useless copper wire. Couriers on pickup trucks now carry orders across 120 to 300-kilometer desert gaps. Approvals that used to take hours now take days, if they come at all. Iraqi radar operators describe ghosting screens as EA-6B Prowlers and EF-111 Ravens pump jamming into their displays. SAM batteries fire optically, wasting missiles at afterburner flares, trying to hit aircraft they can hear but cannot see. The Iraqis have Soviet equipment, Soviet training, Soviet doctrine, but the Soviets never faced anything like this coordinated electronic warfare onslaught. Operators flip through procedure manuals looking for solutions to problems their instructors never imagined. Engineers scramble to create decoys, plywood silhouettes painted to look like MiG-23s from above, burning tire pits arranged to mimic heat signatures of tank formations. Later, coalition pilots will find charred tire beads scattered around bombed positions, evidence of desperate measures. A Republican Guard captain will later claim his unit camouflaged a T-72 as a sand dune, only for laser-guided bombs to stitch it with 5 perfect craters, each one finding the target despite the netting and sand. Saddam's response mixes defiance with delusion. On January 18th, he orders Scud launches the Al Hussein missiles, modified Soviet designs with extended range but reduced payload and accuracy. Approximately 80 to 93 missiles fire over 6 weeks, 39 streak toward Israel, Saddam's gambit to widen the war, to bring Tel Aviv into the conflict, to fracture the coalition. Each mobile transporter erector launcher needs 2 to 3 hours to rearm. Coalition aircraft hunt them relentlessly. The Iraqis create decoys, painted logs on flatbeds that absorb sorties meant for real launchers. The Strategic Messaging Department films Scud launches at night, technicians splicing thunder sound over grainy footage to amplify fear in enemy populations. Baghdad's propaganda machine works overtime, showing strength while the actual military infrastructure crumbles. Television shows upbeat montages, even as field sets flicker from generator surges. Soldiers huddling around Chinese transistor radios trying to hear Baghdad radio through static and jamming. The Iraqi Air Force, once boasting hundreds of combat aircraft, flies fewer than 50 sorties per day by late January. Pilots taxi under camouflage netting, then sprint to runways in broad daylight, hoping to get airborne before strike aircraft arrive. Many jets never leave their hardened shelters, cratered inside concrete bunkers designed to protect them. The ones that do fly face impossible odds: coalition fighters with beyond visual range missiles, AWACS directing intercepts, electronic warfare that blinds their systems. Multiple divisions report radios failing after 10 to 15 minutes of keying due to weak batteries and coalition jamming. Officers resort to runners who memorize 20 to 40-word orders, sprinting between positions. One intelligence major later reports a phone line cut at 2 a.m. was repaired by splicing into a hotel switchboard in Kuwait City. A US bomb severed it again by 2:40 a.m. The improvisation speaks to desperation. Saddam forbids chemical release without his direct code. Chemical troops stockpile sarin precursors near Samarra, but they never receive the unlock word. Perhaps Saddam fears retaliation. Perhaps he worries about wind direction. Perhaps he knows that using chemical weapons would justify anything the coalition might do. The shells sit in bunkers, their deadly potential unused, while conventional explosives rain from above. Corps headquarters generate phantom divisions on maps to suggest reserves that don't exist. Liaison teams place empty tents and burn cook fires to fool satellites. Coalition analysts aren't deceived. They have too many intelligence sources, too many ways of verifying. But the Iraqis don't know their deception is failing. They continue moving imaginary divisions on maps while real units dissolve under bombardment. Field hospitals near Basra admit 200 to 400 wounded per day at peaks. Triage surgeons work in aprons slick with iodine and diesel soot, operating by generator light when the power fails. The wounded keep coming: burns from fuel fires, shrapnel wounds from cluster bombs, crush injuries from collapsed bunkers. The medical system, already strained from 8 years of war with Iran, buckles under the sustained assault. Southern Front logistics report 30 to 40% truck losses by mid-February from air ambushes. Drivers string spare tires on roofs like talismans, hoping the rubber will absorb shrapnel or at least provide warning before a missile hits. They drive at night without lights, following phosphor sticks taped to the vehicle ahead, praying they're invisible to the thermal sights above. Iraqi naval units lay approximately 1,200 mines in the Persian Gulf. On February 18th, the USS Princeton and USS Tripoli strike mines. Baghdad claims sea victory in evening newsreels, showing naval officers receiving congratulations. It's a minor tactical success amplified into strategic significance, proof that Iraq can still hurt the coalition, evidence that all is not lost. The crews who laid those mines, hunted relentlessly by coalition aircraft, know better. Picture yourself as a junior officer in a bunker near Kuwait City. Your telephone is dead. Your radio works for 15 minutes before the batteries die or jamming overwhelms it. Your commander wants to know enemy positions, but your last intelligence update is 3 days old. Above you, aircraft you cannot see, drop bombs you cannot predict. Do you trust Baghdad's claims of victory? Or do you believe your own eyes watching division after division go silent? Brigade Tactical Operations Centers track strike cycles with grease pencil on acetate sheets, trying to identify patterns, predict lulls when movement might be possible. They notice the coalition follows. A rhythm strikes intensify at certain hours, ease at others. But the patterns change unpredictably. Sometimes convoys move unmolested. Sometimes a single truck draws a flight of 4 aircraft. The randomness is almost worse than constant bombardment. Culture officers distribute cassette sermons, framing steadfastness as jihad, resistance as religious duty. Soldiers pin Quranic verses in plastic sleeves inside their tunics, seeking protection from words when armor has failed. The regime always frames military operations in religious terms, but now the rhetoric intensifies. To retreat is to betray God, not just country. To surrender is to abandon faith, not just position. An aide later recalls Saddam reviewing damage reports, dismissing coalition air power as fireworks, predicting the real battle would begin when ground forces crossed into the mother of all battles. Saddam genuinely believes Iraqi forces will slaughter coalition troops in desert fighting, that Western armies will break against prepared defenses, that public opinion in America will turn when body bags return. He's fought Iran for 8 years. He survived. Why should this be different? By the end of January, only 30% of forward air defense missiles remain operational. Many were launched blind at noise and flare, expensive weapons wasted on decoys. Operators describe firing at contrails, at engine sounds, at anything that might be a target. Hit rates approach 0, but orders demand shooting. Empty launchers become targets themselves. Coalition aircraft methodically destroying SAM sites, whether they're active or silent. The smell that permeates everything isn't cordite, but oil, sweet, nauseating, sticking to uniforms. Even before the wildfires begin in late February, crude oil seeps from damaged pipelines, pools in shell craters, coats, equipment. Men wipe their hands on sand that's already petroleum-soaked, creating a gritty paste that abrades skin. The desert has become an industrial wasteland. As February begins, the air campaign enters its 5th week. Iraqi forces in the KTO survive, endure. But they're not fighting, they're waiting, hiding, hoping. The question isn't whether they can win, but whether they can survive long enough for Saddam to negotiate, for international pressure to force a ceasefire, for something to change the equation. They're fighting for time with an army that can no longer tell what time it is, receiving orders from a command structure that doesn't know where they are, defending positions that matter only on maps in bunkers far to the north, where portraits of Saddam still hang beside operational grids showing a war that no longer exists outside those rooms. Soldiers describe rain of black oil snow, flecking their eyelashes as filters clog and lungs burn. Officers tying cafetiers soaked in water over their mouths, while driving under noon skies turned to orange dusk with headlights blazing at midday. This is the moment when an army realizes it's already defeated not in a single catastrophic battle, but through the slow erosion of everything that makes an organized force functional. For Iraqi troops in Kuwait, February 1991 isn't about fighting, it's about enduring. About staying alive in trenches that have become tombs, following orders from commanders who can't communicate, defending positions that satellites photographed weeks ago. This is the war before the war, where morale dies before men do. By late January, Iraqi radar operators have given up trying to track individual aircraft. The screens show nothing but jamming bloom electronic noise that renders their sophisticated Soviet systems useless. They fire surface-to-air missiles optically now, pointing launchers at sound, at contrails, at prayers. One battery commander describes launching 3 missiles at what turned out to be a commercial airliner 40,000 feet overhead, far beyond any weapons range. The missiles arc upward, their motors burning bright against the dawn, falling back to Earth miles away, $3 million worth of ordnance wasted on hope. Republican Guard tank crews conduct maintenance in the pre-dawn darkness, checking thermal sights they know are inferior to whatever the Americans possess. They've heard stories from intelligence briefings, coalition tanks that can kill at 4 kilometers in total darkness, armor that shrugs off anything except the luckiest shot. A gunner in the Medina division practices ranging drills with shells he's not allowed to fire, conserving ammunition for a battle that may never come. His loader jokes about surrendering, with a white bedsheet tied to the gun barrel. Nobody laughs. Saddam issues his no retreat without permission order, threatening court-martial for any commander who withdraws. Field officers complain the approval process takes 8 to 12 hours by courier if the courier survives the journey. A battalion commander near Mutla Ridge watches coalition aircraft destroy his supply, convoy and radios for permission to fall back 5 kilometers. The request travels by runner to brigade, then division, then corps. 72 hours later, approval arrives. By then, his battalion has already been bombed 3 times. Half his vehicles are burning. The order to retreat becomes irrelevant when there's nothing left to move. The Iraqi Air Force faces an impossible choice. Pilots who refuse Martyr sorties one-way missions against coalition targets are reassigned to ground units, stripped of flight status, branded cowards. One squadron allegedly flies 2 jets to Iran rather than face certain death. Better internment than incineration. The regime calls them traitors. The surviving pilots call them smart. Maintenance crews paint kill markers on aircraft that never fired a shot. Morale artwork for a ghost air force. Special security squads position themselves near Basra bridges, watching for deserters. Night echoes with single shots and the wet slap of bodies hitting canal water. Officers whisper about finding entire platoons missing after dawn roll call. Trenches abandoned, weapons left behind. The desertion problem isn't discussed in official reports. It doesn't exist on paper, but everyone knows someone who went to find medical care and never returned. Rations deteriorate week by week. Units that started with adequate supplies now survive on flat Cubes bread and tinned sardines. The weak tea tastes of diesel because the only fuel for cooking fires is stolen from vehicle tanks. Conscripts boil brackish water in ammunition cans. the metal imparting a bitter taste that no amount of sugar can mask. Some units report soldiers collecting rainwater in shelter halves, preferring meteorological moisture to what flows through contaminated wells. The trenches themselves become instruments of torture. January lows near 6 to 10 degrees Celsius wouldn't be extreme in other circumstances, but combined with rain, wind, and the constant mist of diesel exhaust, they're miserable. Trench floors transform into a paste of diesel-soaked mud and crushed gypsum that sucks boots off feet. Men wrap their footwear in plastic bags and strips of inner tube, creating waterproof monstrosities that barely function. Trench foot cases increase daily. Medical officers treat infections with antibiotics, meant for other conditions, rationing supplies that can't be replaced. Commanders burn codebooks in 200-litre drums, the pages curling in gasoline flames that throw dancing shadows against bunker walls. Ash floats like grey fish scales, settling on maps and equipment. If the coalition breaks through, capture means interrogation. Better to destroy everything than risk compromising what little operational security remains. A signals officer saves one frequency list, hiding it inside his Quran, figuring coalition soldiers won't search there. He's wrong. They search everywhere. Culture officers work overtime, distributing cassette sermons, framing the defense as jihad, resistance as religious obligation. Soldiers pin Quranic verses in plastic sleeves inside their tunics, seeking divine protection when human defenses have failed. Friday prayers take on new urgency. Men who barely practiced religion before now prostrate in the sand, asking God for what their commanders cannot provide: safety, food, escape. Civilians in Kuwait City watch convoys pass with increasing frequency. Dented ZIL trucks, tanks streaked with bitumen from camouflage attempts, soldiers with soot raccoon eyes under helmets 2 sizes too large. The occupation force that arrived in August with military precision now resembles a retreating rabble even before the retreat begins. Bath officials requisition more apartments, moving command posts every few days, trying to avoid becoming fixed targets. They sleep under garish chandeliers with blackout curtains pinned by bayonets, maps spread across marble coffee tables designed for tea service. An intelligence major maintains the unit's most precious map, grease-stained, taped at the folds, annotated with coloured pencils and urgent scrawls. He tracks coalition positions based on radio intercepts, bomb damage assessments, prisoner reports. Every piece of information is suspect. Every source could be deception. He plots what he believes is accurate, knowing tomorrow's airstrike will render everything obsolete. Later, after the ceasefire, he'll trade this map to a US sergeant for 2 canteens of clean water. The sergeant will frame it, a souvenir from the world's most one-sided war. Brigade commanders attempt defensive adjustments without proper reconnaissance. Observation posts report movement, but they can't tell if it's coalition, friendly forces, or Bedouin shepherds. Binoculars can't penetrate sandstorms. Periscopes fog in the humidity. Infantry rely on hearing the distinctive turbine whine of M1 Abrams tanks, the rotor thump of Apache helicopters. By the time you hear them, it's too late. Think about commanding a company in this environment. Your radio works 15 minutes per day if you're lucky. Your trenches collapse in the rain. Your men are sick, hungry, demoralized. Coalition leaflets promise bread and medical care for surrender. You're supposed to shoot soldiers who even discuss capitulation, but you can't watch everyone. Your officers signed loyalty oaths in blood, literally. But what does loyalty mean when headquarters disappeared under laser-guided bombs 3 weeks ago? KTO artillery continues firing, but the tempo has dropped. 4,000 to 6,000 rounds per day became hundreds, then dozens. Tubes overheat and split at the muzzle after sustained use. Ammunition stockpiles look impressive until you realize half the shells are corroded, primers questionable, propellant charges separated by decade-old packing material that dissolves on contact with moisture. Gun crews fire harassment barrages at likely assembly areas, aiming at map coordinates, hoping to hit something, anything, to justify their existence. Republican Guard units maintain the pretense of readiness. They paint fresh camouflage on vehicles damaged beyond repair. They conduct radio checks on frequencies they know are monitored, broadcasting strength they don't possess. They're Saddam's strategic reserve, positioned to counterattack the coalition's real invasion when it comes up Wadi al-Batin. They wait in positions that are already targeted, for an enemy that will strike somewhere else, following orders from a command structure that exists only in imagination. As February progresses, even Baghdad's propaganda becomes desperate. Television shows the same clips repeatedly. Saddam reviewing troops, missiles launching, anti-aircraft fire illuminating night skies. The soldiers watching on flickering field sets know it's theatre. They've lived the reality. They've seen the impenetrable defences penetrated. They've experienced the sophisticated air defence system blinded. They know the difference between what Baghdad claims and what their eyes witness daily. One final detail haunts the KTO. Saddam expects the main coalition thrust up Wadi al-Batin. He's concentrated 5 to 6 divisions east of Kuwait to meet this attack. The Western Desert, that vast expanse of sand and stone where nothing survives, where no army could operate, remains covered by thin screening elements. It's the same strategic blindness that cost him battles against Iran, the same refusal to believe modern armies can traverse impossible terrain. The western flank, where history will actually be written, remains virtually undefended because Saddam knows better than his maps. February 23rd. The ground war is 24 hours away. Iraqi forward positions radio fragmentary reports about unusual activity to the west, vehicle sounds, dust plumes, electronic signatures. Corps headquarters dismisses these as reconnaissance elements, probing for weak points. The real attack will come tomorrow or the next day, up the expected axis, into the prepared killing zones. Saddam has predicted it. The generals have confirmed it. The maps show it clearly. What could possibly go wrong? Iraqi outposts radio Tashkil Kabir mass formation at 4 a.m. on February 24th, their antennas snapping off from blast pressure as the left hook begins, ending any chance of warning forces deeper inland about what's actually coming through the western desert. This is how assumptions kill armies. While Saddam waits for coalition forces to drive into his prepared defences up Wadi al-Batin, 18,000 coalition vehicles are already slicing through the western desert he deemed impassable, turning his careful defensive plans into strategic irrelevance. The next 100 hours won't be a battle, they'll be a pursuit, a technological mismatch so complete that Iraqi forces won't know they're defeated until they're already destroyed or surrendered. The Medina Division tank crews wake to a sand-brown fog of dust and JP-8 jet fuel. Their thermal sights bloom with hot specks sliding across arcs, M1 Abrams and Bradley fighting vehicles materializing from terrain that shouldn't support mechanized operations. The Americans aren't supposed to be here. This sector has minimal defenses because Saddam knows, absolutely knows, the main attack comes from the east. The division commander frantically radios for instructions. The response takes 6 hours. By then, the question is irrelevant. A Medina tank gunner describes his final engagement. He acquires what he thinks is a target at approximately 3 kilometers maximum effective range for his 125mm gun. He fires. The sabot round streaks down range, impacts, does nothing. The target and M1 Abrams hasn't even noticed. 3 seconds later, his tank erupts. The crew compartment fills with superheated gas and spalling metal. The loader dies instantly. The gunner escapes through the commander's hatch, his hands blistered from hot metal, his eardrums ruptured from overpressure. He runs into the desert without looking back. 3 kilometers. They killed him from 3 kilometers away, and he never had a chance. Tawakkalna brigades attempt a 15 to 20 kilometer fighting withdrawal, executing Soviet doctrine against an enemy that doesn't fight like Soviets. Their defensive positions are oriented east, expecting attacks from Kuwait. Coalition forces strike from the west and north. Iraqi tanks die head-on, their frontal armor designed to stop Soviet weapons useless against depleted uranium penetrators fired from M1 Abrams tanks. Crews describe seeing their battalion commander's tank simply explode, the turret cartwheeling skyward, before realizing they're under fire from an enemy they can't even see. Corps staff plot kill boxes with grease pencil on acetate overlays, marking coordinates for artillery and air defense. But updates lag 6 to 12 hours behind reality. Units fire on grid squares already abandoned by retreating battalions. Ammunition expenditure reports show thousands of rounds fired at empty desert. One battery commander receives coordinates, saturates the area with high explosive shells, then discovers he's just bombed his own reconnaissance elements, who withdrew without informing artillery. Republican Guard counterattack orders arrive too late. Saddam has finally authorized movement, but the authorization process consumed precious hours. Liaison jeeps vanish on air-plumed roads, vaporized by Apache helicopter strikes or A-10 gun runs. 2 brigades never launch because their commanders never receive the order. The messengers are dead. The radios are dead. The command structure is dead. Units that do move discover they're counterattacking into empty desert, while the actual enemy bypasses them entirely. An aide later claims Saddam slammed his fist on the map, shouting, "Hit him here!" pointing at a sector already overrun 6 hours earlier. The command bunker operates on information that's obsolete before it arrives. Couriers deliver reports of positions that no longer exist. Staff officers plot enemy movements based on yesterday's intelligence. Saddam issues orders for a battle that's already over, commanding divisions that have ceased to exist as fighting formations. Highway 80 becomes a river of headlights flowing northbound as darkness falls. KTO headquarters relays maintain order, but units discard their radios to avoid being fixed by coalition electronic surveillance. Better to be alive and out of contact than dead with proper communications. Sergeants navigate by following the vehicle ahead. Officers burn maps rather than risk capture with them. The retreat hasn't been authorized, but authorization doesn't matter when the alternative is annihilation. Coalition artillery implements steel rain multiple launch rocket systems, saturating Iraqi positions with submunitions. A battalion dug in near Basra describes the attack. A sound like approaching freight trains, then the world transforms into white phosphorus and fragmentation. The bombardment lasts 8 minutes. When it ends, 70% of the battalion is combat ineffective. The survivors emerge from bunkers to find their vehicles perforated, their ammunition exploding in secondary detonations, their wounded screaming for medics who are themselves casualties. Picture yourself as a division commander. Your secure telephone is dead. Your radio works intermittently. Higher headquarters demand situation reports you can't provide because your subordinate units aren't answering. Coalition forces are somewhere to your west, your north, possibly your east. You have no reconnaissance, no intelligence, no communications. Do you stay and die in position? Do you retreat without orders and face court-martial? Do you surrender and spend the rest of your life branded a traitor? There are no good choices, only degrees of catastrophe. The Western Desert, Saddam's impassable terrain, proves perfectly suitable for modern mechanized warfare. Coalition forces navigate using GPS technology the Iraqis don't possess. They move at night using thermal sights that turn darkness into advantage. They sustain operations with logistics chains that function despite the distances. Everything Saddam assumed about coalition capabilities is wrong. Everything he believed about Iraqi defenses is illusion. Iraqi soldiers in forward positions watch the horizon glow orange from burning vehicles. They hear explosions that never seem to end. They smell smoke that carries the scent of burning diesel and something worse, flesh. Officers who demanded soldiers fight to the last man now slip away in civilian vehicles, leaving their units leaderless. Loyalty oaths become meaningless when the officers who enforced them are gone. Republican Guard divisions, Saddam's elite, his strategic reserve, his iron fist engage coalition forces for the first time and discover they're outmatched in every category: range, accuracy, armor, night vision, communications, coordination. American tank commanders kill Iraqi vehicles they can barely see at distances, Iraqi crews considered safe. Republican Guard tankers trained on Soviet equipment designed for European warfare find themselves fighting a different war entirely, one where their training and equipment are inadequate. Saddam's television appearances continue showing confidence. State media broadcast footage of Iraqi artillery firing, soldiers cheering, commanders reviewing maps. None of it reflects reality. The soldiers watching these broadcasts on sputtering field sets know the truth. They're living it. The disconnect between propaganda and experience becomes total. Baghdad claims victory while divisions dissolve into fleeing individuals. February 24th ends with Iraqi forces in complete disarray. The defense that was supposed to bleed coalition forces white has been bypassed. The counterattacks that should have driven invaders back into the sea never materialized. The strategic reserve has been committed piecemeal and destroyed in detail. Saddam's 100-hour disaster has just begun, but already the outcome is certain to everyone, except those in bunkers deep beneath Baghdad, where maps still show divisions that exist only as administrative entities and order of battle charts that bear no relationship to scattered remnants hiding in the desert. The question is no longer whether Iraq can win. The question is, how many will die before Saddam admits what every frontline soldier already knows: the war is over, and they lost before it even began. Oil fires transformed day into perpetual twilight on February 26th, as Iraqi forces set more than 600 Kuwaiti wells ablaze. Driving under noon skies turned orange dusk with headlights blazing, creating an apocalyptic landscape that makes retreat even more nightmarish than defeat. This isn't strategic withdrawal, it's dissolution. The KTO collapses in 48 hours, entire divisions evaporating as soldiers abandon vehicles intact, officers burn identity papers, and the elaborate defensive system that took months to construct becomes a vast killing field where survival means running north through burning oil fields that turn rain into black snow. For Iraqi forces, the final days aren't about fighting, they're about escaping the furnace Kuwait has become. February 26th. 27th. The oil fires begin as a scorched earth tactic deny the coalition Kuwait's oil wealth, create smoke screens against air attacks, punish the emirate for resisting occupation. Engineers wire explosives to wellheads, detonate charges that send crude geysering skyward. Some wells burn immediately, others spray oil that pools, ignites hours later, creates lakes of flame. The smoke plumes rise thousands of feet, merge into a continental shroud that blocks the sunday. Coalition ground forces report driving through darkness at midday. Iraqi soldiers describe worse rain that falls black, coating everything in petroleum residue. The oil snow flecks eyelashes, sticks to skin, turns white cafés into tarred rags, filters clog within hours. Men tie soaked cloth over mouths, trying to breathe air that tastes of benzene and sulfur. The smell permeates everything, sweet, nauseating, inescapable. Uniforms absorb so much crude that washing becomes pointless. The petroleum stench will linger for weeks after capture or escape. A signalman in a rear echelon unit remembers the last coherent message from a cut-off battalion near the burning fields. Send shoes. Their boots had melted at the soles from heat radiated by burning wells. Soldiers wrapped feet in blankets, in canvas, in anything to protect against sand, turned to griddle by proximity to flames. The request goes unanswered. There are no shoes, there is no resupply, there is only retreat through hell. The coalition ground war runs approximately 100 hours from February 24th through 28th. The KTO reports organizational collapse in 48. Some sectors lose 50 to 70% of vehicles not destroyed, but abandoned intact. Crews exit perfectly functional T-55s, discarding helmets and webgear, walking north with hands raised or empty. Tank parks littered with operational armor become surreal monuments to demoralization. One Republican Guard maintenance company abandons 15 tanks with fuel in the tanks, ammunition racked, engines running. They just walk away. Republican Guard officers circulate claims of destroying M1 Abrams tanks. Morale officers demand proof-burned hulls, captured crews, anything. The claims evaporate under scrutiny. What Iraqi tankers mistook for M1 kills were support vehicles, decoys, or thermal mirages in sight systems pushed beyond capability. One battalion claims 3 M1s destroyed at night. Dawn reveals they destroyed 3 abandoned Iraqi trucks. The truth demoralizes more than enemy success. They're shooting ghosts while coalition forces annihilate real targets. POW cages swell to 60 to 80,000 Iraqis within days. Commanders note many surrendered in full kit, weapons clean, uniforms intact, some clutching pay ledgers and unit administrative stamps. They weren't defeated in combat, they chose capture over continuing. Coalition guards describe Iraqis forming orderly lines, self-organizing by unit, maintaining military bearing even in surrender. The discipline that kept them in positions during the air campaign now facilitates mass capitulation. An Iraqi lieutenant describes his surrender to American cavalry. His platoon emerged from bunkers with white cloth tied to rifles. The Americans provided water, MREs, cigarettes. Medical corpsmen treated wounded Iraqis before their own soldiers, with minor injuries. The lieutenant expected brutality based on Iraqi military culture. Instead, he received Geneva Convention compliance. The cognitive dissonance is profound. The enemy shows more concern for his welfare than his own officers did during the siege. Saddam convenes crisis meetings at Al Radwaniyah Palace. Around the table, half-brothers and security chiefs outnumber line generals 2 to 1. Military professionals who might speak truth are excluded. Security apparatus loyalists who'll report what Saddam wants to hear dominate discussion. A surviving officer later describes the atmosphere, not strategy session but loyalty demonstration, each participant emphasizing commitment to the regime while carefully avoiding blame for the unfolding catastrophe. Special security squads intensify operations near Basra bridges. Night resonates with single shots 9mm pistol reports from officers executing deserters. Bodies splash into canal water, current carrying them downstream where they lodge against destroyed vehicles or burned oil slicks. Some nights the shooting never stops. Some nights entire platoons vanish. The regime tries to stem retreat through terror, but fear of coalition firepower exceeds fear of Iraqi bullets. Imagine yourself in that chaos. Your division has ceased to exist as a fighting force. Officers who demanded you stand and die have fled in staff cars. Coalition aircraft strafe anything moving. Ahead lies more burning desert. Behind lies the enemy. Surrender means uncertain captivity but probable survival. Continuing means certain death. What would you choose? Estimates of Iraqi killed in action vary wildly, 20 to 35,000, according to coalition assessments. Baghdad records remain classified. Officers interviewed years later whisper, "Kathir Jiddan," very many, then go silent. The true number lies somewhere between propaganda, minimization, and coalition maximization. What's certain? Thousands died in vehicles caught on Highway 80, in bunkers buried by bombing, in desperate last stands when withdrawal became impossible. The smell that dominates isn't cordite but crude oil. Petroleum permeates air, water, sand. Soldiers drink oil-contaminated water because it's the only water available. They eat food that tastes of benzene. They breathe air that burns lungs. The environmental catastrophe compounds the military disaster, creating conditions where survival itself becomes the primary battle. Commanders burn final documents in improvised furnaces, codebooks, roster sheets, intelligence reports, political commissar evaluations. Ashes rise on thermals created by fires, swirl through smoke-choked skies, settle on retreating columns like grey snow. An intelligence officer describes watching months of careful record-keeping agent networks, order of battle assessments, electronic warfare analysis curl into ash, better destroyed than captured, better gone than turned against them. Pilots who survived the air war now fight as infantry. Flight suits exchanged for army uniforms, ejection seats traded for trenches. Some still wear flight boots superior to infantry issue, marking them as aircrew among ground troops. They describe surreal transition from supersonic flight to subsonic retreat, from cockpit to crater, from hunting coalition aircraft to hiding from coalition armor. Culture officers continue distributing cassettes framing defeat as divine test, retreat as tactical repositioning, surrender as temporary setback. Soldiers listen politely, then discard the tapes. Religious faith survives propaganda, but propaganda masquerading as faith convinces no one. Those who pray seek genuine solace, not regime messaging wrapped in Quranic quotation. Civilians in Kuwait City watch the final exodus. Dented military vehicles pass through streets once patrolled by occupation forces, now abandoned by deserters. Tanks with empty fuel tanks are towed by commandeered civilian trucks. Soldiers ride on civilian buses, their weapons discarded, their uniforms exchanged for looted civilian clothes. The occupiers become refugees, fleeing through territory they controlled days earlier. February 28th. The ceasefire ends approximately 100 hours of ground combat. Saddam declares the "mother of all battles, a victory Iraq survived. Kuwait proved expendable, the regime endures." Private conversations among officers describe the 100-hour disaster. They know what happened. They experienced the dissolution. They understand the scale of defeat. But survival requires accepting the official narrative, at least publicly. The war ends with Iraqi forces scattered across southern Iraq, equipment abandoned across Kuwait, survivors streaming north through burning fields that will smolder for months. The army that invaded Kuwait in August 1990 no longer exists. In its place, dispersed individuals, broken units, traumatized survivors carrying memories of technological warfare they never understood and defeats they couldn't prevent. The only question remaining is how Saddam will explain this catastrophe and who will pay the price for his miscalculation. Baghdad radio broadcast victory speeches, while officers privately whisper the truth in coded language, Kathir Jiddan, very many dead, and silence heavier than words could convey, knowing that acknowledging defeat means joining those who disappeared into basement interrogation rooms. This is the moment when survival becomes political theatre. The army that dissolved in Kuwait must be explained, justified, transformed into narrative that preserves the regime while punishing those who implemented its orders. For Iraqi officers returning from the 100-hour catastrophe, the real battle begins now, not against coalition forces, but against a regime that demands loyalty, without acknowledging reality, that requires scapegoats for decisions made in palaces far from burning oil fields. Post-war purges hit units labeled defeatist within weeks of ceasefire. Some commanders receive 7 to 10-year sentences for unauthorized withdrawals. Others are promoted for loyalty, not performance. The criteria have nothing to do with military competence. Did you retreat without permission? Court-martial. Did you defend a hopeless position until annihilation? Promotion. Did you survive when Saddam expected martyrdom? Suspicion. The regime's logic operates on principles disconnected from battlefield reality. A colonel who defended his sector until coalition forces bypassed his position entirely finds himself under investigation for not pursuing retreating enemies. His defense that pursuit required mobility and fuel he didn't possess is dismissed as excuse-making. He's reassigned to training command. His career effectively ended because survival without dramatic action implies insufficient commitment. Meanwhile, an officer who abandoned his position receives commendation for tactical flexibility. The difference? Political connections, not military judgment. Debriefs produce lessons written for Saddam's review. The reports document communication failures, air supremacy's impact, the importance of protecting the western flank. They recommend decentralizing communications, integrating air defense with mobile reserves, developing countermeasures against precision-guided munitions. Few recommendations are implemented before the next war in 2003. The regime learns nothing because learning requires admitting mistakes, and mistakes imply leadership failure. An intelligence officer describes preparing his after-action report. He documented specific communication breakdowns, equipment failures, tactical errors. His supervisor returns the draft with entire sections deleted anything suggesting systemic problems, anything implying the regime's strategic decisions contributed to defeat. The final version blames corrupt contractors, cowardly conscripts, and traitors. The structural issues that guaranteed failure remain unaddressed because addressing them questions infallible leadership. Republican Guard units regroup around Baghdad by April 1991 with approximately 60 to 70% paper strength. Equipment losses exceed thousands of vehicles, tanks, armored personnel carriers, or artillery pieces. Some divisions exist as administrative entities with minimal actual combat power. The Medina Division, once Iraq's premier armored formation, fields battalion strength elements with mismatched equipment. Replacement vehicles include captured Iranian equipment from the previous war, obsolete T-55s from reserve storage, even civilian trucks modified with armored plates. Officers conduct inventory under surreal conditions. They count vehicles that were abandoned intact in Kuwait, now coalition trophies or scrap metal. They account for personnel who simply vanished deserters, captured, killed, no one knows. The personnel officer maintains two rosters, official records showing authorized strength and reality documenting actual present-for-duty soldiers. The gap between them is staggering, and discussing it is dangerous. Think about writing that debrief report. You experience the systematic failure of every system simultaneously: communications, logistics, intelligence, air defense. You watch tactics designed for different enemies fail against opponents using weapons you'd never encountered. Do you write the truth and risk punishment? Do you lie and enable future disasters? Most choose survival, crafting reports that blame everything except the command structure that demands loyalty over honesty. Final staff estimates identify the three-blade scissor that dismembered the KTO: communication failures, air supremacy, political micromanagement. Each blade alone would have been damaging. Combined, they were catastrophic. Communication failures meant units couldn't coordinate or receive orders. Air supremacy meant movement brought destruction. Political micromanagement meant even working communications couldn't authorize timely responses. The KTO died from systemic failure, but systems reflect leadership, and leadership cannot be questioned. Chemical troops who stockpiled sarin precursors near Samara never received authorization to deploy weapons. Officers interviewed later speculate why fear of retaliation, concerns about wind direction, and political calculations. The truth remains classified. What's documented? Chemical capabilities existed but weren't used, suggesting strategic paralysis at the highest levels. Iraq possessed weapons that might have caused coalition casualties, but lacked the command structure to employ them effectively, or the strategic wisdom to understand that use would justify overwhelming retaliation. Corps headquarters that generated phantom divisions on maps continue the practice. Deception becomes a permanent feature of military reporting. Units that exist on paper but not reality fill organizational charts. Equipment inventories show tanks and artillery pieces that were destroyed or captured. The fictional military on paper serves political purposes, demonstrating strength to potential enemies, justifying budgets, maintaining the regime's prestige. Reality matters less than appearance. Survivors describe the smell that lingered longest, not cordite, not diesel, but crude oil. Petroleum absorbed into skin, saturated clothing, permeated hair. Months after returning to Baghdad, veterans detect oil scent when sweating, as if the Kuwait experience secretes through pores. Some claim they can still taste it years later. Benzene notes in water, petroleum undertones in food. The environmental catastrophe becomes physical memory, impossible to wash away. Lessons for future conflicts remain unlearned. Iraq develops no effective countermeasures against precision-guided weapons. Air defense improvements focus on quantity over quality. Communications rely on the same vulnerable landline networks. Officer Corps continues prioritizing political reliability over tactical competence. The institutional changes that might prevent future disasters threaten the power structure that ensures regime survival. Better military effectiveness would require decentralization the regime cannot tolerate. Baghdad's victory narrative becomes official history. State media produces documentaries showing Iraqi artillery firing, missiles launching, soldiers marching, captured coalition equipment, a handful of vehicles, some damaged aircraft is displayed as proof of success. The 100-hour ground war becomes tactical repositioning. The tens of thousands captured become temporary detainees. The systematic defeat becomes mother of all battles, victory. Repetition transforms propaganda into accepted narrative, at least publicly. Private conversations tell different stories. Officers gather in homes, not headquarters, speaking carefully about what actually happened. They discuss the mismatch between Soviet-era equipment and modern warfare. They analyze how GPS navigation enabled desert operations they believed impossible. They recognize that fighting the previous war's methods guaranteed defeat against enemies who'd evolved beyond those tactics. But evolution requires resources and autonomy the regime won't provide. A maintenance officer describes the most telling detail. Coalition forces used vehicles captured intact from Iraqi positions as spare part sources. American mechanics salvaged Iraqi equipment, abandoned with keys in ignition, fuel in tanks, ammunition loaded. The material wasn't destroyed, it was surrendered. Soldiers chose captivity over continuing, even when weapons remained functional. The psychological defeat preceded physical collapse. By late 1991, the army exists in dual reality. Official reports describe combat-ready divisions prepared for future conflict. Private assessments acknowledge broken units requiring years to reconstitute. Officers maintain both narratives simultaneously: public optimism, private despair. Survival requires performing loyalty while preparing for inevitable failure when the regime's delusions again encounter reality. The final assessment, never officially recorded but whispered among survivors: Iraq lost before the first bomb fell because the command structure couldn't adapt, the equipment couldn't compete, and the strategy couldn't succeed. But admitting this requires questioning decisions made by infallible leadership, and questioning leadership means joining those who disappeared into basement cells. So the lesson remains unlearned, the mistakes unfixed, the cycle prepared to repeat because regime survival requires maintaining illusions even when those illusions guarantee military defeat. The 100-hour disaster becomes foundation myth for regime resilience. We survived, superpower assault, we endured, we remain. The narrative serves political purposes while ignoring military reality. And 12 years later, when coalition forces return, the same systemic failures will produce the same inevitable results, because learning requires honesty, and honesty threatens everything the regime exists to protect. A colonel trades his most precious possession, a grease-stained, taped, hand-annotated map representing months of intelligence work to a US sergeant for 2 canteens of clean water, the clearest expression of how completely priorities shift when survival replaces strategy. This is the story of what happens when an army doesn't die gloriously in battle, but simply stops existing when soldiers become refugees, when units dissolve into individuals, when the machinery of war becomes archaeological debris scattered across desert that witnessed history's most lopsided conflict. For Iraqi forces in the ceasefire's immediate aftermath, the question isn't how they lost, but who they've become in the losing. Coalition ground forces discover Iraqi equipment, abandoned with such haste that keys remain in ignitions, ammunition stays loaded, personal effects litter crew compartments. American mechanics use captured vehicles as spare parts sources, salvaging functioning components from tanks their enemies chose to abandon rather than fight. A maintenance sergeant describes finding a T-72 with the engine running, radio playing Baghdad propaganda, tea still warm in the commander's cup. The crew simply walked away mid-shift, preferring captivity to continuing a war already lost. POW processing reveals unexpected details. Iraqi soldiers arrive, clutching pay ledgers, unit administrative stamps, personnel files, bureaucratic debris from an army that maintained paperwork precision while losing tactical coherence. Coalition guards describe Iraqis self-organizing by unit in captivity, maintaining military structure even in defeat. Sergeants conduct roll calls. Officers file reports on paper scrounged from captors. The discipline that kept them in hopeless positions now facilitates orderly surrender. An Iraqi lieutenant describes his first meal in captivity, an American MRE with more calories than his unit received in 3 days of combat rations. The chicken and rice comes with a heating element that seems like sorcery to soldiers who've been eating cold sardines. Chocolate bars, coffee packets, even toilet paper luxuries his logistics system couldn't provide even before coalition bombing destroyed supply lines. He eats slowly, savoring each bite, wondering why his government claimed these enemies were barbarians when they feed prisoners better than Iraq fed its fighting forces. The smell of burning oil dominates everything. Veterans describe detecting petroleum scent months later when sweating, as if Kuwait's environmental catastrophe secreted through pores. Clothing saturated with crude during retreat never fully loses the odor. Some claim they taste benzene years afterward, petroleum notes in water, hydrocarbon undertones in food. The war becomes olfactory memory impossible to wash away, a physical reminder that penetrates deeper than psychological trauma. Civilians in Kuwait City emerge from basements to find occupiers transformed into refugees. Iraqi soldiers who paraded through streets in August now flee in commandeered civilian vehicles, uniforms exchanged for looted clothes, weapons discarded in gutters. Kuwaitis watch convoys of defeat, dented trucks, damaged tanks towed by civilian equipment, soldiers with soot-darkened faces and thousand-yard stares. The occupation force that arrived with military precision exits as desperate rabble. Highway 80, later called the Highway of Death, becomes monument to panic. Coalition aircraft caught retreating columns in killing zones that stretched for kilometers. Survivors describe walking between burned vehicles, stepping over debris both mechanical and human, following refugees ahead because roads might be mined, but foot traffic suggests safety. Some walk barefoot, boots destroyed by heat near burning wells. Others limp on makeshift crutches, wounded but mobile, knowing medical care waits north in Basra if they can reach it. Picture yourself in that retreat. Behind you, coalition forces advance unstoppably. Ahead lies more burning desert. Your vehicle is out of fuel. Your unit has dissolved. Officers who demanded you fight to death have fled in staff cars. Do you surrender to foreigners whose language you don't speak? Do you hide among civilians? Do you walk north, hoping to reach Iraqi lines before exhaustion or coalition patrols find you? Every choice carries risk. Every decision could be fatal. Coalition forces report Iraqis surrendering to journalists, to helicopter pilots, even to remotely piloted vehicles. The white flag becomes universal signal bed sheets, undershirts, towels, anything pale tied to rifles or tent poles. Some soldiers prepare surrender materials days in advance, carrying white cloth in pockets, waiting for opportunity. Others improvise when the moment arrives, using bandages as flags, medical supplies as peace offerings, trading ammunition for cigarettes once capture becomes inevitable. Medical treatment shocks Iraqi prisoners. Coalition corpsmen treat enemy wounded before friendly forces with minor injuries. Geneva Convention compliance that contradicts everything Iraqi military culture taught them. A wounded sergeant describes American medic cleaning his shrapnel wounds, administering antibiotics, bandaging carefully. The medic works professionally, no judgment, no revenge, just medical care. The sergeant expects brutality based on how Iraqi forces treated prisoners. Instead, he receives healthcare superior to what his own military provided when he was fighting for them. Debriefs document that only 30% of forward air defense missiles remained operational by week 6 of the air campaign. Iraqi operators launched blind at noise, flares, anything that might be targets. Hit rates approached zero, but orders demanded shooting. Empty launchers became targets themselves, coalition aircraft methodically destroying SAM sites whether active or silent. Iraqi air defense, once sophisticated and dense, became expensive fireworks display, achieving nothing except ammunition expenditure. Commanders conducting post-battle analysis discover patterns of failure repeating across sectors, units oriented east, while coalitions struck from west. Communications designed for Soviet-style warfare couldn't function under electronic attack. Tactics developed for fighting Iran proved useless against enemies employing different operational concepts. Every assumption was wrong, every preparation was inadequate, every confidence was misplaced. Special security squads that shot deserters during combat now face their own reckoning. Coalition forces discover execution sites, canal banks littered with bodies, bridge approaches marked with bullet casings. Some squads destroy evidence, burning identification papers, scattering remains. Others attempt integration into regular units, hoping anonymity prevents accountability. The regime protects some, punishes others based on political calculations, having nothing to do with wartime actions. Culture officers who distributed cassette sermons, framing resistance as jihad, now face soldiers questioning why God permitted such complete defeat. Religious faith survives, but propaganda disguised as religion convinces no one. Those who prayed genuinely during bombardment continue praying. Those who performed religious observance for political benefit abandon the pretense. The difference becomes clear in captivity, where no commissars monitor compliance. Baghdad radio continues broadcasting victory speeches while actual veterans return carrying truth contradicting every official claim. State media shows limited coalition equipment captured a handful of vehicles, some damaged aircraft presented as proof of Iraqi success. The narrative requires ignoring tens of thousands of Iraqi prisoners, thousands of destroyed vehicles, and complete strategic failure. Repetition transforms propaganda into accepted public narrative, though private conversations acknowledge reality. An intelligence officer describes the cognitive dissonance of maintaining dual awareness, public acceptance of victory claims, private understanding of catastrophic defeat. Survival requires performing belief in official narrative while knowing the truth. Speaking honestly means joining those who disappeared into security service basements. So veterans nod during victory celebrations, repeat approved talking points, maintain facade while trauma and truth remain private burdens. The final irony. Iraq's military on March 1, 1991 is weaker than when invasion began. Equipment destroyed, personnel scattered, morale shattered, command structure discredited. The army that conquered Kuwait in hours was itself conquered in 100 hours. The strategic gamble failed completely. The tactical execution proved inadequate. The operational concept was flawed fundamentally. Yet the regime survives. Saddam remains in power. The Republican Guard, bloodied but intact enough to suppress internal dissent, protects the palace. Political purges eliminate scapegoats, while promoters of disaster retain positions. The system that guaranteed military failure ensures political continuation because regime survival requires maintaining illusions even when those illusions cost tens of thousands of lives. As summer 1991 arrives, oil fires still burn in Kuwait. The environmental catastrophe will continue for months, smoke plumes visible from space, ecological damage persisting for decades. For Iraqi veterans, the fires become metaphor. Their military burned as thoroughly as Kuwait's wells, the damage as long-lasting, the recovery as uncertain. They return to society carrying knowledge that contradicts everything their government claims, maintaining silence that enables the regime to prepare for future disasters by learning nothing from past mistakes. By April 1991, the Republican Guard regroups around Baghdad with paper strength showing 60 to 70%, but everyone knows the numbers lie. Equipment losses exceed thousands of vehicles, and the elite formations that were supposed to be Saddam's iron fist can barely maintain battalion strength elements with mismatched equipment cobbled from reserves and war booty. This is the final lesson of Desert Storm from Iraq's perspective. An army can survive annihilation on paper while dying in reality. A regime can claim victory while planning for the next disaster. An institutional delusion can persist through catastrophe, because learning requires admitting error, and error implies leadership failure. For the Iraqi military, the 100-hour war becomes a ghost that haunts every decision until 2003 brings the same inevitable result for the same unchangeable reasons. The lessons written for Saddam's review document everything: decentralize communications to survive jamming, protect the western flank against mobile warfare, integrate air defense with ground forces, develop countermeasures against precision weapons. Staff officers compile thorough analyses based on painful experience. Intelligence sections provide detailed assessments of coalition capabilities. Field commanders submit recommendations grounded in tactical reality. The reports are comprehensive, accurate, and ultimately worthless, because implementation would require admitting that leadership decisions contributed to defeat. A staff officer describes watching his meticulously researched analysis return from higher headquarters with entire pages blacked out. Any suggestion that Republican Guard positioning was flawed, deleted. Any implication that Saddam's no-retreat order caused unnecessary casualties removed. Any recommendation requiring strategic flexibility rejected. The final approved version blames equipment maintenance, soldier morale, and bad weather. The systemic failures that guaranteed defeat remain unaddressed because addressing them questions infallible wisdom. Equipment inventories reveal the scale of material loss. Thousands of tanks destroyed or captured T-55s, T-62s, even the newer T-72s. Artillery pieces abandoned intact. Air defense systems bombed into scrap metal. The Iraqi military that invaded Kuwait fielded Soviet-era equipment. The army that survives possesses less capability than it had in 1980, when war with Iran began. A decade of conflict has consumed Iraq's military power, replacing modern capabilities with obsolete reserves and captured Iranian equipment from the previous war. Replacement vehicles include grotesque improvisations. Civilian trucks receive welded armor plates, transforming buses into improvised personnel carriers. T-55 tanks from 1950s production replace destroyed T-72s. Some units receive captured Iranian equipment, creating maintenance nightmares, spare parts that don't fit, ammunition that doesn't match, training manuals in Farsi that mechanics can't read. The logistics officer maintains 3 separate parts inventories: Soviet standard, captured Iranian, and improvised Iraqi. Nothing interfaces properly. Officers conduct training with lessons learned from coalition tactics, but implementation fails at every level. Decentralized communications require trust in subordinate commanders, trust the regime cannot permit. Mobile warfare requires fuel stocks the economy cannot provide. Night operations need thermal sights the military budget cannot afford. Every tactical improvement requires resources or autonomy that political considerations prevent. The army trains for the last war while the regime ensures the next war will repeat the same mistakes. Imagine being that staff officer, writing recommendations you know will be ignored, documenting failures that cannot be acknowledged, preparing an army for defeat because the only alternatives threaten regime survival. Do you continue serving, hoping eventual implementation will save lives? Do you resign and risk suspicion of disloyalty? Do you go through motions, collecting salary while knowing your work accomplishes nothing? Most choose passive compliance. Salaries must be earned, families must be fed, and questioning only brings danger. The Iraqi Air Force that survived the war faces particularly stark reality. Aircraft that flew to Iran rather than face destruction remain interned dozens of fighters and bombers that pilots chose to preserve rather than lose. The regime calls them traitors. Surviving pilots call them pragmatists. Iraq's Air Force essentially ceases to exist as effective force. No training flights without fuel, no parts for maintenance, no hope of matching coalition capabilities should conflict resume. The Blue Water Navy that laid mines achieves similar irrelevance. Vessels rusting at moorings, crews reassigned to army units. Culture officers attempt narrative reconstruction, framing Desert Storm as victory because Iraq survived, because the regime endured, because Saddam remains in power. They produce documentaries showing Iraqi artillery firing footage from early in the air campaign before ammunition shortages reduced tempo. They display captured coalition equipment, a handful of damaged vehicles presented as proof of success. They interview heroes who claim impossible kills. The narrative requires ignoring reality so thoroughly that even propagandists struggle maintaining consistency. Private conversations among veterans tell different truths. They discuss watching thermal-equipped M1 Abrams tanks kill Iraqi armor at distances T-72 crews considered safe. They describe American infantry with night vision, operating in darkness Iraqi forces couldn't penetrate. They recount GPS navigation enabling coalition forces to traverse impassable desert. They understand the technological gap isn't closing, it's widening. While Iraq rebuilds with obsolete equipment, potential enemies develop even more advanced capabilities. Special Republican Guard formations receive priority for reconstruction, their political reliability making them more valuable than combat effectiveness. They're positioned around Baghdad, oriented inward against potential coups rather than outward against external threats. The mission shift is explicit: protect the regime, not the nation. Artillery pieces that should point toward borders aim at potential uprising centers. Tanks that should train for mobile warfare practice crowd control. The final accounting reveals uncomfortable mathematics. Estimates suggest 20 to 35,000 Iraqi dead. The regime's own records remain classified. Add wounded requiring long-term care, psychological casualties unable to function, prisoners who languish in coalition custody for months, deserters who never return. The human cost exceeds casualty figures. Families receive death notifications without bodies. Widows receive pensions insufficient for survival. Children grow up fatherless. Their parents' sacrifice commemorated in propaganda while actual support remains minimal. Economic consequences compound military defeat. Damaged oil infrastructure reduces exports. International sanctions limit reconstruction. Debt from Iran-Iraq war combines with new obligations. The treasury that Saddam expected to refill with Kuwaiti oil instead faces bankruptcy. Military budgets shrink while threats multiply. Soldiers receive delayed pay. Equipment replacement slows. Training reduces. The army that barely survived 1991 enters a death spiral of declining capability. Coalition forces that devastated Iraq's military in 100 hours maintain presence in the region. No-fly zones constrain Iraqi sovereignty. UN inspections seek weapons programs. Kuwait rebuilds with international support while southern Iraq festers. The regime that promised victory delivers occupation, sanctions, and decline. But acknowledging this requires admitting error, and error implies leadership failure. So the official narrative persists. Iraq won by surviving. Resistance continues. Eventual triumph is certain. 12 years later, coalition forces return. The lessons unlearned from 1991 manifest again: communication failures, air supremacy, political micromanagement. The army, rebuilt on delusion rather than reform, collapses even faster. The regime that couldn't admit mistakes in 91 makes identical errors in 2003. The pattern repeats because survival required maintaining illusions, and those illusions guaranteed eventual destruction. The 100-Hour War's legacy isn't just military defeat, it's institutional paralysis, where learning becomes impossible, where honest assessment threatens stability, where the only acceptable response to catastrophe is claiming victory. For Iraq's military, Desert Storm becomes original sin, the moment when delusion replaced reality as operational foundation, ensuring every future conflict would replay the same disaster until the regime that refused to learn finally ceased to exist.